more honored guests sitting in the audience. How are you guys doing this morning? You seem very quiet and dead. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about, I was told to talk about economy and all that, and I think that Imran Khan, Hafiz Sheikh, and everybody under the sun does a pretty good job of doing that. So I thought I'd produce a few thought pathways for all of you. And before I start, let me just say thank you to CGSLS, who kindly tolerate me all the time and actually keep me on their advisory board. I think that's very, very kind of them. And I think it's very challenging to see and happy to see that the steps they have taken in the last 1.5 years to really get this going. And I think Colonel Khalid Taimur Akram, I have to pay him special credit for making all this happen and make CGS very lively. But two thoughts before I get into my presentation. I want to challenge the barrister who came before me, and I think that you all should ask him this question. Is money holding back ideas, or are ideas not able to get the money? I think Baki and Kareem are very good examples of where ideas were definitely not adaptable to Pakistan, and we'll talk about that a bit. And the other thing I want you to talk about and start thinking about very, very hard, and I am thinking about it these days because my second generation of kids going to university and they're really costing a pretty penny. Are universities worth it in the future of technology? So I think ye do sawal, please keep them primary in your minds. So I want to start first by laying down some of the things we've seen happen, and I didn't want to regurgitate McKinsey and all that. But I think those of you who've been reading news around the world, COVID, the pandemic, has actually compressed the arrival of technology. So some of us, if you look at it, and actually if you look at the recent work done under McKinsey, you'll find out that actually the biggest compression is not happening in North America. The biggest compression of technology in terms of overtaking and being adopted is happening right here in Asia. So I think we are one of the biggest winners. This graph just shows you, and I took this from the New York Times, came out actually end of last year, but basically shows you where spending is going. So post-pandemic, there's a huge shift in spending, and as you can see that it's mostly going to services which are technology-driven. So before we go further, I think there are a few myths, and before I get into technology of it, I think a lot of people, and my former employer was the World Bank 7 years ago. I spent 20 years there, moved around about 3 continents, and I can tell you this, that cultures are very difficult to change, but what the pandemic has told us is there are some things that are here to stay, and the technological shift is by far one of the things that is here to stay. Let's talk about a few other things. Remote work, right? We all noticing. I don't know how many of you have tried to look at property prices, but everyone loves property in Pakistan, so I hope some of you at least research property prices around the world. So unlike Pakistan, most of the developed countries, property prices in the urban areas are going down. Because as remote work is coming up, it's basically changing the nature of cities, staying in cities, and the geography of jobs, as we call it. Digital customer services is coming around. There's a greater shift to e-commerce. We've all seen that. One of the other things, and the list is long, but I think important to see, is basically staying home. A lot of people talk about, at the middle of the pandemic, and I think the pandemic's still not over, but let's talk about the first wave. So tether end of the first wave, you found a lot of people talking about, hey, I'm really sick and tired of staying home. Second wave of pandemic, I'm finding what all my friends are saying, well, it's quite fun staying home. Did you watch Netflix? So, I'm not talking just about, and I know what I'm talking about today is related to a certain class of society. It's not related to the lower tiers of society. But we'll come to how those lower tiers will adapt. But I think life as we know it is changing. And because it's changing, some of the jobs available to the vocational workers and the lower skilled workers, the opportunities are also changing drastically. So, I mentioned real estate, but let's talk about manufacturing. Manufacturing is going to see a major shift, and there are pretty much, if you pick up the strategy and business plan of any large manufacturer, be it Huawei, be it Toyota, be it Nissan, be it Mercedes, you pick it up, you'll find out that they are now totally committed to totally using artificial intelligence and technology in their product lines, in their factory flows. So I think this is something that is not going to change. Retail and financial services, even in Pakistan, we've seen how that has changed drastically. Some of us who thought we would never do this. I order Food Panda now. 2 years ago, I used to think it was a joke. My kids used to do that, but I think everybody is now realizing that even retail stores, Agas that shut down, big sorry story, I don't know if the Germans around know this, but it's a big thing for us. The Aga superstore in Karachi shut down, but even Agas went on to an e-retail model before the shutdown. So, it's the sign of times to come, and those of us who say, yeah, we're going to go back to our shops, we're going to go back to our offices the same way we did before the pandemic, I think life is going to change. I think it's important to also learn who survived best during this pandemic, and I think that's again a story of technology. We find that basically resilient businesses equals to those businesses which were either ready with technology or adapted fast to technology. Right? So you basically have businesses who were able to be efficient, which means they harnessed technology and were able to streamline operations. They had the productive advantage. They immediately set up work remotely. Now, because of 18 years of being in an institution, being on the retirees board also, I looked at what's happening in the World Bank. Do you know that World Bank, just like a few other large firms in America, have simply told everybody not to come to work? Does that mean that the World Bank is lending less? Does it mean that Alphabet is producing less? Does it mean Google doesn't work as efficiently? No, absolutely not. So the thing is, and all of you are going to, and please, let's keep this, I'm going to keep my discussion today because I thought hard about, what am I going to talk about related to the rich class of society, the middle tier of society, or the lower tier of society? I think we need to be very cognizant it's going to impact everybody, and we're going to get to that very soon. But I think if we go further, robots and AI are the future. And yes, a lot of you are going to lose their jobs. Yes, if you were putting widgets in a car, in an assembly line, you are going to lose your job. If you had decided to take a civil service exam and become a grade 17 officer, you are going to very soon lose your job. And when I say very soon, my soon is 10 years, okay? Because I think to think in 2-3 year terms is to be reactive. To be proactive, one has to think about the future, think at least a generation or a half a generation ahead. So that means a 15 to 30 year time horizon. So basically one of the things that I really, since in 2020, 3 million new industrial robots got into operation. That is more than the number of robots that got into operation in the 6 years between 2014 and 2020. That's telling you something. Guess who's losing their jobs? Not people who are adaptive and cognitive, right? People who are the lower tier of the society are losing their jobs. So the premium for skills and resilient skills is rising. And it's very interesting that we teach our kids everything except cognitive skills, the ability to do critical learning. Because these two things, it's a very difficult thing to understand, but even I got my mind around it. Socio-behavioral, right, plus critical thinking is equal to cognitive. So people who can understand society and behaviors of other people better, plus those people who are able to critically analyze and do game theories better, are the kind of people, no matter what job, whether it's genetics, whether it's going to the moon, whether it's producing shoes. This is the class of labor that the world will be demanding, and this is not produced by going to a university. And again, something when we talk about policy. So there's another thing that's happening, ladies and gentlemen, and I think it's a very, very good thing. The geography of jobs is changing because of the emerging digital platforms. One of the phenomena that we are now observing is even in a place like Vietnam, in a place like Myanmar, in a place like Philippines, places like Bangladesh, places like Nepal, places like Maldives, places like Nairobi, Kenya. These are places I'm giving examples because these are places that I myself have interacted with. The economy is moving into the rural areas. And why is it moving into the rural areas? Is because of these platform jobs. And we're going to talk a little bit about digital platforms in one second. I don't know how many of you attended Ignite and PSEB seminars. I attended some virtually even as late as 1 week ago. And our ministers are still talking about the gig economy. So the gig economy was this big fallacy. Let's say it's not a big fallacy, it's a huge big fallacy. That's an oxymoron, but nevertheless, I just want to emphasize. So basically somebody 10 years ago came up, there's a McKinsey article, and this is what I love about McKinsey. They actually kind of like influence our thoughts so much, and some of us who are generationally challenged forget to read every day because they too change. So McKinsey said that in 2030, 60% of all jobs generated in the US of A are going to be individual contractors, or then came the term gig economy. And lo and behold, Pakistan, the last 3 governments have been talking about gig economy, gig economy, gig economy, and somebody claimed that Pakistan is the second largest exporter of software. No, it's not. The fact that we make freelance money, $2 billion, no, we don't. I can sit down and explain to you how the economics of this works, but the bottom line here is gig economy is not working because freelance work today is less than 0.3 to 0.5% of the total economic labor force in the world. So this is not me speaking, there is a source there, please go check out all these sources. This is not me making claims, we did some research on this. So what is really happening? What is really happening is before the gig economy could really come about, organized platforms or commerce platforms, e-platforms have started coming around. And as you do realize there's a limit to what an individual contractor can do unless they are part of a team, right? Because that's when you're part of a team is that when innovation happens. So I think what it's giving way to is what we call virtual clusters, and which is my next point to give to you. That instead of the gig economy, we now have platform firms, and they are really dominating the markets. The second thing that's also happening, and I think we need to be very careful in our trade policy on that, is that value chains. One of the biggest debates happening in WTO, the biggest debate happening in World Economic Forum, in the World Bank, in a lot of the multilaterals, is that are the global value chains going to survive? But unfortunately, if you look at the changing spree, a lot of people feel threatened because if you can't travel, if there's a pandemic, if there's a war, how are you going to get your intermediate inputs, right? So a lot of people, including China, mind you, are trying to reshore. So it's anybody's bet. So what would you do in a bet? At least do a 50-50 chance and at least try and inshore or reshore a lot of what you think about you need as a nation. And that includes food, by the way. So basically, now I think the last 2 slides for me are what I was asked to close with is what are the policy options? I think some of these policy options globally, and this is again, I borrow from the World Bank, but I couldn't find anything better. You know, the work at World Economic Forum is also good. But basically, there are 3 to 4 things that everybody has to realize as a nation. And I'll come to Pakistan in the next slide. First is invest in human capital. And I know it's rati piti, sorry, it means it's been said all over again, over and over. But the thing is that this is going to change. Investing in human capital does not mean sending them to universities. Investing in human capital does not mean sending them to schools. You basically have to introduce a sense of lifelong learning. How many people understand lifelong learning? Does it buck the traditions of pedagogy? It does, right? It's basically saying you don't just go to school for 16 years and then decide that I'm now qualified. Unless you keep learning, so basically your tools that you provide to your children have to be adapted. The other thing is social protection. And you know, Trudeau has been very good. He's been playing around with universal basic income, so are a lot of other countries. And really, a lot of countries now think, after the pandemic, that universal social protection's got to be improved. And this is not a SARS, mind you. This has not been a zero income support program, mind you. These are ideas, what the government is implementing now are ideas of the 19th century. We need a government that thinks about what is going to be, and it then relates directly to creating fiscal space. Because if you are going to improve social protection, then you've got to make sure that nobody evades taxes. And all this relates to IT, It relates to using artificial intelligence. The other important thing, and two things. Number one, internet for all. Connectivity we cannot do without. And the last thing is to reduce labor market rigidities. Allow people to move and transition jobs, and allow those creating jobs to not be penalized for creating formal jobs. And last, what do we do in Pakistan? And I think the do in Pakistan I'm going to spend 2 minutes on, if you're allowed. Basically, rural power, internet, innovative education, e-government, data, and new cities. Just remember this. This is the future of Pakistan. This is the soft revolution. This is how we're going to deal with the technological revolution. And I don't say this, a lot of people I try to bring together in a few lines, a lot of ideas. First, reduce rural energy poverty. 140 million Pakistanis have either no access to power or have partial access to power. If you read the government's websites, it says we are 90% electrified. The definition of electrification is if a wire passes over my house. That is not electrification. Why is that important? All the services that we are going to have to deliver are not going to be by building a new BHU, not by building a new school. It is going to happen, ladies and gentlemen, especially the youth sitting here. It's going to happen through IT, it's going to happen through technology, it's going to happen virtually. Because we just don't have the money to support 300 million people and go to everyone's house and provide healthcare. So what does that mean? You got to have electricity, and what's the next thing? Anybody awake? Yeah, so gaye. What's the next thing? Internet. You got to be connected, right? So if any country has to think about free provision of internet services, it has got to be us. Please remember that the more challenged, the more underdeveloped you are, the more new tools you have to adopt, because old tools were costly, they were labor intensive. Innovative education. I think this whole thing about HEC and universities galore. Has anyone tried to hire students recently? I can't find one student that can write, can critically think. That's an honest fact. And I'm based in Chakshazad, near some of our friends, near Comsats. I am in a university, right? There are no students to be hired. They all want to prove that they have a piece of paper and they want a job. And then I come 9 to 5, that also 4 days a week, and they want to get paid and they want to enjoy life. That's not cognitive skills, right? So we got to change how we are educating our youth. Fourth, you know who's going to create the largest demand for IT? It's the bloody government. What are we doing? We are raising salaries of grade 1 to 16. There's no political economy about it. This is what revolutions are made of. So don't put people like me and ask them to talk about economy, because this is the future we have to face. The government and the size of the government tells us that it is going to be the largest generator of IT demand. It's not going to be Baikia, it's going to be government services and defense services. Fifth and second last, data centers. We have totally ignored, even a country like Iran is building massive data centers. Where are you going to keep data? Right? It's not going to no longer be in your USB stick. It's all in the cloud. Everything is happening in what we call cloud computing in Azure. Everything. Does anybody read IT? So how does cloud computing happen? How do you run an electric car, an automatic electric car that is intelligent? It's an exchange of data, nanoseconds, right? Millions of bytes of data going back and forth from that cloud car to the cloud. Where is that cloud? We have all the wherewithal to create the cloud, because data centers need three things. You need clean energy because they consume a lot of energy, so you need renewables. We have a lot of water in the north. We have a lot of hydropower. We have a lot of renewable power. They need temperate climate because they get damn hot, right? So the norther they are in Pakistan, the better it is. And guess what? Have you ever been to GB? Have you ever been to Chitral? They're almost at the same literacy level as a lot of developed countries. So you have your literate youth, you have your temperate climate, you have the right energy set. Well, develop data centers. I think we are going to totally ignore ourselves because for many other reasons, which I will not mention here. And last but not least, what is this going to do? Right now, we have 4, 5 concentrated multi-million metropolises, right? America right now is 350 million people, so very soon we will be that size, right? America has 100 cities below a million population. Pakistan has less than 35. Okay, so we need new cities, but that doesn't mean Bahria towns. We need clustered, high-rise, small, innovative, youthful cities. And I'll stop here. Thank you so much for allowing me, but I mostly want to thank the CGSS because it gave me a chance to actually research some of these ideas, and I think that it made me think, and I hope that what I have given here also makes all of you think. Thank you.